Hello, I'm Graham Horton and welcome to part 2 of this brand new video tutorial series I'm running for absolute beginners using the Panasonic Lumix FZ80 or 82 camera. Now in today's video I want to talk about the aperture and shutter priority modes. Now first of all, these modes give you a little bit more control over how the camera will take the pictures or video for you. But what I want to say from the outset is the aperture priority mode isn't really a mode that you can use with any degree of certainty with this particular camera, for the fact that this is a small sensor camera and it's got what's called an inherent large depth of field. So even when you're using this widest aperture of f2.8, the depth of field is equivalent to something like f11 or f16 on a full frame camera, so you've got very little control over depth of field. And one of the beauties of using aperture priority with a camera with a larger sensor is the fact that you can control that amount of depth of field. And normally a smaller aperture will give you a larger depth of field and a wider aperture will give you a narrower depth of field. But the difference between the wide aperture of f2.8 and the telephoto aperture of f5.9 or f8 at the maximum is very little with this particular camera. So for that reason I'm going to suggest that we use shutter priority for all the shots. Now today I'm going to go up to a waterfall which isn't too far from here, and I'm going to set up and take some pictures of that waterfall in shutter priority mode so I can demonstrate how you can use the shutter priority mode to select the shutter speed that you want for your images. So for example, if you're shooting sports or birds in flight, you want a very fast shutter speed. If you want to create those soft dreamy waterscapes, then you need a very long shutter speed, and that is what we can do with shutter priority mode. Now you might see on this camera today I've got the lens head, which is a 55mm wide angle lens head, and it allows me to attach filters to the outside edge. If we use the standard 55mm thread, then you can't use a lens head with those filters. So that's the reason I bought this lens head. It protects the lens. I don't use any secondary filters on the lens, no UV filters, no skylight filters. I prefer just to keep that lens clean with the microfiber cloth. This lens head gives all the mechanical protection for that lens. I've never had any problems with lenses in the 30 odd years I've been shooting with cameras, so I've never used secondary filters, always use a lens head. So you'll see me using this lens head and the neutral density, or if you like the sunglasses for the camera, to reduce the amount of light that's going to be hitting the sensor, so we can extend the shutter times to compensate. I'll put links to this particular lens hood in the video description below, and if you're a new viewer and you're already liking the series, why not hit that subscribe button and the bell notification icon. It really does help the statistics for the channel, so if you do that I'd be really appreciative. So let's go over to the waterfall. I'll set up and we'll take some pictures of the waterfall. First of all, without that neutral density filter, just seeing how far we can get. It depends obviously on the ambient lighting. Today it's quite dull, so I'm expecting we'll get something like a 40th or a 50th of a second at the f4, f5.6 aperture with ISO 80. If it goes darker, then we'll be able to get some longer shutter times, but if it stays like this, I'll be using that neutral density filter to give me some shutter speeds in the order of about half a second or 1 second to give us some nice soft dreamy waterscapes. So let me move over to the waterfall. I'll set up and I'll join you there in a moment. Well, I've set up the camera now to record this waterfall, and I'm going to be using shutter priority mode because I want to be using an extended shutter time to give me that soft silky look at water that you get with those long exposures. But first of all, I'm just going to go into the standard shutter priority mode and have a look at what the camera's recommending with the auto ISO setting. So the camera is now set up for shutter priority mode. You can see the S at the top left hand side of your screen, and if I depress the shutter button, you can see the camera's choosing an ISO of 80. That's at the bottom right hand side there, and my shutter speed is set to 1/80th of a second, and that is because the aperture at the moment with this zoom setting is f5. Remember in part 1 we talked about zoom and the effect on aperture. So that's the composition that I want. So if I'm going to take that shot with a 2-second timer, we'll take that shot, we can have a look at it, and you should be able to see some fluidity in that water running over the waterfall. So let me just take that first shot for you. So that's with 1/80th of a second. Now, because the camera is in auto ISO, if I change the shutter speed, you notice the camera will change the ISO to accommodate that. So if I change the shutter speed by using the back control dial, then you can see as I'm going up the shutter speed to say 1/400, the ISO is raised to 320. If I go further to 1/800, then the ISO has gone to 640, and that's how the camera balances the exposure. So if I went to 1/1600 of a second to capture that water in absolute stillness, then the ISO would be 800. But you notice there the camera is flashing the fact that that's beyond the shutter range for the amount of light that's actually appearing in the scene at the moment. So I couldn't take that shot. I need to go down a little bit to 1300. That's still in the red zone. You notice the exposure meter showing at the top. Anything over 1,000th of a second will be in the red band, and it wouldn't be able to take that shot, or if it did, it would be underexposed. So 1,000th of a second is the best we can get with ISO 800. So let's take that shot and again compare the water of the waterfall to the one at 1/8th of a second. So let's take that shot. So again, that was fluidic. I'm going to try and get a little bit more detail in the water. So what I'm going to do is to use exposure compensation again. So that's with the back control dial, we push that in, and I'm going to go down to -2/3 of a stop. So that has changed my shutter speed, or it's changed the aperture in this case to ISO 640. So let's take that shot, and there should be some more detail in the highlights of that water. Notice here that I'm using the spot focus, so I can actually change the position of where the camera is focusing, and I want it to focus exactly there on that water. So let's just take another shot just to confirm that. Now, if I wanted those soft silky water looks, then I'd have to extend that shutter speed. So let's turn the shutter speed all the way down as far as we can go. So the ISO has dropped to 80, which you'd expect as you let more light into the camera. The exposure meter is showing me that anything over 1/40th of a second would not be allowed. So 1/40th of a second is okay. Go to 1/30th of a second, you can see we get the red band. So we'll go back up to 1/40th. Let's take that shot and have a look at the waterfall. There's a little bit more fluidity in that water, but I want to get some silky smooth. So the only way you can do that is to either wait for it to go darker, so you get a darker ambient light, or you can use neutral density on the camera. So you can see I've installed this neutral density 2 to 5 stop filter on the camera, and I've got the camera set as it was before without the filter, so that's 1/40th of a second at ISO 80. You can see that the shutter is showing that it's red and it wouldn't be acceptable. So I'm going to extend the time of the shutter, and you can see the shutter scale there is in red from just over 1/6 of a second down to just over 1/2 a second. So I'm going to go for about 1/4 of a second exposure first of all. So the camera is 1/5 of a second, let's go for 1/4 of a second. So the 1/4 of a second exposure, and the camera is in that 2-second mode again. So let's take that shot. So you can see we've got a lot more motion in that water. We can get a little bit more with going to 1/2 a second, which is the minimum that it will go with this particular filter. So let me take that shot at 1/2 a second. You see there's a lot more fluidity to it. I'm going to change over now to a 6 to 9 stop filter, which will extend the time even longer. So I'll set that filter up and we'll have another look. You can see that was the original exposure at 1/4 of a second. Again, that's now underexposed, so I can actually extend the shutter time. And you can see the scale is grey from just over 2 seconds, so about 1.5 seconds all the way up to 3 seconds. So when I get into the 2-second band there, or 3.5 seconds, we should be able to take that picture. I've set the camera into manual focus because with this amount of neutral density, the camera will struggle to find focus. So I've got the focus point and then changed over to manual focus and then install the filter to get the right focus. So let's take that shot. It should be 3.5 seconds, and of course then we'll get a 3.5 seconds dark slide time to reduce the noise. So let's take that shot. So there's our 3.5 second exposure, and there's our 3.5 second dark slide to give us a final picture. So there we are, that's how to use shutter priority mode on the Panasonic Lumix FZ80-82 camera. There is a filter that you can use to extend that into night shot, and I'll be covering that later in this series. But for now, that's all for the video on how to use shutter priority mode. Now in the next video, we're not going to be talking about the manual mode, as most people will have trouble following the concepts of manual mode, because we need to talk about the ISO, shutter speed and aperture relationship called the exposure triangle. So I'm going to skip over that for the moment, and we'll look at shooting video, what you'll need to be able to shoot video to get the right frame rates and right shutter speed, and how you can record audio separately and then sync it in post-production to the video to give you better audio. Just as I'm doing now, I'm going to be using my iPhone to record this video and the audio, and I'll be syncing it to the video we've shot with the Panasonic Lumix FZ82 while we've been shooting the waterfall. So until the next one, thanks again for watching, thanks for your patience, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Goodbye for now.